Thank you for participating in this late session and something that I hope is going to be really engaging and highly interactive, especially this late in the day. My name is James Haithcoat. I'm a principal geospatial consultant with DevGlobal Partners. My background is primarily in defense, actually. I spent over a decade in the defense geospatial intelligence industry, primarily working in research and development, and I've been in the global development geospatial space for almost 2 years now. So still relatively new to this domain relative to a lot of you here. The intention of this session is really to be reflective, to talk about some of the things that have come up over the course of the convening. I want to spend a little bit of time doing a brief retrospective on some outputs from an activity that we undertook in the virtual May convening, and then really just open it up for discussion around overcoming some of the obstacles that we face in the community around collaboration. We've seen consistently across the convening the value of cross-disciplinary collaboration, but there's a lot of different challenges that arise when we look at collaborating, whether that's access to data, technical resources, funding. So really our focus for the session will be to bring some of those up, not necessarily fix them, but at least highlight them and have some discussion around how we can move forward. Before we get started, like I mentioned, my background is in geospatial, so I don't have a background in impact evaluations, but fortunately, the beauty of this community is that we have a lot of different representation here. So I'm going to hand it to my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Petronella, and then we'll work our way down, and I'll ask you to please introduce yourself, but also state your title, and very briefly describe your role within your organization. Petronella, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Petronella Halwiindi. I'm with Farm Africa. I serve as a country director for Uganda, and I'm also managing our scale-up in the DRC. Well, my role is really as an implementer. We implement food systems, a food systems approach combined with a market-based approach to dealing with food security, nutrition, and income needs for smallholder farmers in East Africa. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tomoko Harigaya, and I'm the Chief Economist and the Director of Research at Precision Development, which is a nonprofit that uses scientific insights and evidence to design and scale customized services for smallholder farmers. So I work, across functions within the organization and external collaborators, researchers, scientists, to facilitate kind of, research for implementation and impact.
That's not me. So I'm Dan Stein. I'm the Chief Economist at IDInsight. IDInsight is a nonprofit. We do research, data, M&E type work. In my role, I develop and coordinate big impact evaluations, but I also play a bit of an innovation function, which includes trying to figure out how to integrate more Earth observation into our work.
Good afternoon. My name is Mensah. I'm the director of the Center for Remote Sensing and GIS. We are based in the University of Ghana. And currently, we are working with the Severe West African Program, and I'm the lead for land use, land cover, and ecosystems. So currently, we are helping institutions in our national organizations and also the regional bodies in how to use EO data. Currently, we are not using EO for any kind of impact assessment, and so my role here is how to learn and see how we can mainstream that into what we do in Severe West Africa. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hamissou Samari. I am a senior program officer for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a Washington-based agency. In that role, I have overseen a number of evaluations spanning multiple countries in West Africa, mostly, from Benin to Senegal to Cape Verde to Niger. And speaking of Niger, we have been testing, piloting use of EO with NASA to do data collection in our agriculture project in the Coney, and Mathematica team is here. They can attest to that. So it's been quite an interesting experience so far, and I look forward to sharing what we have done so far. And if anybody has any question, to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and again, thank you for being willing to be on this panel, especially a little late notice. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the outputs from our May convening. And what this was a collaborative effort to try to identify some gaps and put them on paper. So what we did was we brought a bunch of people together virtually. Many of you may have participated in this exercise. And we asked them each to identify with one of 4 primary user personas. Now, the user personas are pretty generalized, as they'd have to be to just categorize us into 4 different clusters. But the idea was just to get the perspective of implementers, evaluators, Earth observation scientists, experts, and funders on some of the gaps that exist within the GeoField and with the EO4IE ecosystem. So this map, it's probably a little hard to see, but we'll go through this in a little bit more detail. But basically what it shows is the number of requests from each of these self-selected user personas to the others within the ecosystem. So we worked through this exercise, and the request was this. It was to write down a need that exists within your user persona, and then write who can help you or who you perceive can help you to address that gap or need. So just a few things on this real quick, because we do have limited time, is you can see that we had a little bit of a higher representation of Earth observation experts, remote sensing geospatial experts, but we had also a larger number of requests from the rest of the community going into the Earth observation experts. We had very limited funders. I think we only had a handful of funders. They're very participatory. It gave us some good insights as well. But we'll revisit this, and for the sake of time, we'll actually get into it. So these requests I aggregated from the many different needs that were identified during the exercise. So this is not representative of the full collection, but is rather representative of the most frequently requested items within the group. And I should have mentioned that our user or our sample size for this was only about 50 people. So I think there's some biases that are inherently present in this, and we can talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to, you'll have to forgive me, I'm going to depart from best speaker or practices for a moment, because I'm actually going to read these directly off the slide. I find that when someone's talking, it's hard to scan or actually ingest the information in these, and I think there's actually going to be value to reading these sequentially to set the stage for our conversation. So from the evaluators, what we heard was that the pace of innovation is rapid, it's difficult to keep up. And you can see the legend there, but you see on the right side who they've identified that could help with these needs. It often takes persuading to see the added value of Earth observation. Is it worth the effort? There's a lack of platforms and opportunities to learn from one another. We need to understand the limitations of EO and IEs and what it can and cannot do. We need help communicating and conveying EO data and observations. Their distance from the implementation often leads evaluators to believe that implementation was simpler than it actually was. Technical Earth observation resources are difficult to retain and expensive, and we need more incentives to collaborate and share tools and knowledge. And this is what we heard from the implementers. Budget constraints, both in available resources and how they can be allocated, are a challenge. We have challenges with staff capacity, retention, and burnout. We have limited bandwidth, both literally and figuratively. The quality of ground data requires careful planning. We sometimes have limited literacy in Earth observation. There's a lack of heterogeneity within and between implementers. We struggle with understanding how to plan for EO-based projects, and we need to understand what ethical challenges may arise from the use of Earth observation. From the Earth observation experts and the remote sensing community, we're often disconnected from the people in the field. We often lack reliable ground observation data. We need to understand the technical and hardware limitations of implementers and evaluators. We sometimes struggle to translate technical info into less technical groups. We may not have the required depth of domain knowledge around specific ag implementation practices outside of the Earth observation component. We sometimes lack an understanding of the hierarchies and bureaucracies that might inhibit data gathering and distribution. We often get distracted by academic or scientific questions that are not well aligned with the needs of farmers and implementers. We often run into issues with the quality and availability of the required data sets to solve the challenges presented. And last one, I promise, like I said, I'm not adhering to speaker best practices, so just bear with me. From the funders, what we heard was sometimes we may not have the necessary local knowledge to inform metric evaluation and learning indicators and/or context of implementation challenges. We may not have the in-house expertise to apply Earth observation to MEL. We need help socializing the use of Earth observation to donor leadership and partners. We need clear examples of how Earth observation adds value to impact evaluations and supports impact. We may lack an understanding of the full scope and utility of Earth observation. And a lot of funding is not at the farmer level and is focused on systems, markets, and input delivery systems. Directly applying Earth observation to impact evaluations may be new territory. And that was the last one, I promise. I'll flip back to our ecosystem map. The way I'm going to structure the rest of this is I have a few questions for our panelists, but I'd also like to get your involvement. I feel like I could have pulled many of you up here to be on this panel because we're all experts in our own right or in our own fields. So I'll be looking for your engagement, but we're going to start off with some questions for the panelists, open it up to questions to the panelists from you, and then we're going to just open it up for general observations and insights from the group. The first question that I have, and Tomoko, this one's for you, but I'd like to hear the insights from our other panelists as well. So my background is geospatial. So a lot of the presentations that we've seen over the course of this convening have been highly engaging to me. It's, whether it's discussing a novel technical approach or the use of traditional geospatial methods to effectively implement different types of applications. However, much to our collective value, we're not all geospatial experts. So we can kind of see from the convening exercise outputs that there's often a need from implementers, evaluators, and funders for a better understanding of the value of some of these technologies that may be a little bit abstract or a little bit hard to interpret. So my question to you, Tomoko, is how can us being closer to the technical side and having a better understanding of some of these technical implementations, how can we better communicate the value of these technologies to the rest of the community, and how can they be made more accessible and interpretable to the community?
Thanks for that question. So this is just my quick reaction, just reflecting on the last couple of days of conversations. I think, I do see this theme about there's a little bit of disconnect between maybe, local stakeholders and EO experts. I actually thought, when I got the invitation, I thought it was actually interesting that it's framed as Earth observations for impact evaluations. Because I think what we mean really is that Earth observations for learning and improving what we do on the ground, right? That's where the impact is. I wonder there's a kind of this orientation, current orientation to focus on impact evaluation, just to focuses on the interactions between Earth observation experts and evaluators. And then, of course, we get a lot of input from local stakeholders, but there might be kind of a need to think about bottom-up problem identification, I think, and kind of starting from, what the problems, biggest problems that farmers are facing, implementers and local stakeholders are facing, and then see, how to solve those problems and prioritize some of those use cases. I do see challenges in terms of the incentive alignment where a lot of the researchers are kind of looking for things that could eventually publish, but yeah, I think that's something that just comes to my mind.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other panelists like to weigh in?
Thank you. Yeah, for me, these few days have shown me how complementary our efforts are, and as EO scientists, we have been busy developing products for people, and sometimes we like to think for them, and probably also want to develop apps that we think they would need, which they don't. Here, I have found out that this is kind of like a demand-driven kind of effort where the impact evaluators are seeking out for the EO people and see how they can use EO technologies to complement what they are doing. And so I think we need to engage some more. As an EO expert or EO specialist, I do not know anything about impact evaluation, and so it will be useful for us to engage some more and also develop some kind of guidance. I think I mentioned this before, some kind of guidance documents where some of the terminologies and some of the approaches are made very simple for EO practitioners to understand, and also from the EO side, we also communicate in a way that the IE people can understand, so that together we can share knowledge and also try to resolve some of the issues that the impact evaluators are looking out for. Thank you.
Yeah, looking onto this matrix, the one thing that caught my eyes is this, the local expert area. There's the one thing that is so unique to that is that all the arrows are one way to that one. I think that speaks volume about the way we tend to treat our local expert and how much we don't seek enough, we don't take advantage of the local knowledge. So by and large, we tend, I mean, when I said we as a expert within the donor or research community, tend to use local expert as our just go to people to do kind of petty stuff. Although it's very clear that them living day to day in the situation, they know a lot better than sometimes we give them credit for. So if there is any piece of advice I will give, is that as we making our way into this new environment of technology and with a lot of unknowns, that we do not repeat some of the mistakes that the development community has been accused for in the past. Meaning that the tendency for us to make important decisions without consulting with the local communities and those that stand to benefit from it. I remember yesterday during one of the panel, I think one mentioned something about the fact that people feel very uncomfortable with the technology. Some group of people feel uncomfortable. I think I will go even further to say that technology can be very scary to so many people. It can be scary because every day we live, we see in the news article things about how AI, our machine learning is about to take over our lives, our livelihoods. So that's so scary. But what's scarier is the fact that it's for a group of us, a group of people gathering in a European city and making decisions about, deciding how to make people's life better without, in the first place, having them involved in the process. So one of your questions is about how what some of the obstacles that we face with the communities, that stems from that, sometimes that area. I can just give a little anecdote, and my direct supervisor is here. She can correct me if she can keep me in check. We all remember a few weeks ago, there was a coup in Niger. Just a few days before the coup, we were already scheduled to have our drone fly over the farming plots. So it just happened that the drone fly was scheduled for the 29th of July, and the coup took place 2 days earlier. So at MCC, we all freaked out. We just thought that would be the end of the process because no military regime will allow, they will not even allow like a playground kite to fly over people's head. Would they allow like a drone to be flying over people's farms? But we were so surprised that not only did they allow for that to happen, they actually gave the permit for the drone fly operator to do the flying. They didn't do that because they think we are special or we have any superpowers. They did because after I look back what we have done upstream a few years before, how much outreach we did on the ground with local civil society organization, youth group, women's group, research community across Niger. So everybody's aware of what they stand to gain from that. So even the newcomers into the power, they did not find that as scary enough for them to ban it. So it's just to say that technology can be scary, but you will not blame some people for them not really embracing our approaches. Because if there's just, what I'm trying to just say is that those farmers, those producers, those fishermen you listed, they have reasons to believe that at any convening, at any meeting, whenever they're not invited to the dining table, if I may say so, they are very likely to be on the menu, and you will not blame them for that. So that's something I just wanted to say. If we want to increase our outreach efforts. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And that's a great observation. You know, one of the things that we noticed, and the reason there's no arrows from the local experts, is we did an assessment of the participants in the community of practice, and we created the 4 personas based on that. But it was recognized that as we identified some of the gaps, that the need wasn't from these participants, it was from the local experts. That's an excellent call out. Speaking of which, that I think there's kind of a natural transition here. So I had a question for you, Petronella, and I think it's related to the one that I just asked. You know, being a little bit closer to the implementation side, I'm curious if you think that between your experience with local experts, between your experience with implementers, I'm curious just to know what you think the real barriers are, if the ones that we captured are actually reflective of the needs of implementers, or if there's something missing or something should be prioritized. And I'll flip back to that slide for you as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. The first thing that comes to my mind, I think, based on the review that was done and also my interactions with most of the participants here, what comes to my mind is the fact that sometimes we don't understand each other. It's about, we're all talking about a demand-driven approach, but do we understand what that means? Drawing from my experience with an expert, an international expert on Earth observations, I needed something to be done on a baseline. And I obviously didn't have the capacity to articulate exactly what it was I was looking for, but I needed to be able to capture the changes, like the current status of the landscape I was planning my project to happen. And I go to this expert, and they say, we can't do that, we can't do this, we can't do this, and we can't do that. And I'm like, so where do I see your value add? And then they come with a whole bunch of lists of things that they can do. And probably I'm only able to tick off 3 or 4 as being relevant to meeting my need. So I think one of the barriers is really in our language, in our collaboration. Maybe we are missing something. We are not understanding each other because on one end, the implementers don't really have the capacity to understand exactly what it is. We see the value, but when you come to us and you are very scientific, we get lost in the language, and then it becomes very difficult for us to really, gel, So I think there's a lot of room to improve our language. That's one of the barriers I see. I don't know if other experts have similar experiences or anything outside of that. Besides, another need I have, and this is a need I keep communicating, because working with smallholder farmers, we are driven to demonstrate impact. Smallholder farmers want results. If we're going to promise that we can work with them and increase their incomes, if we're going to promise that we're going to work with them to increase food security and nutrition security, everything we're going to put into that project has to make sense. How are we communicating it? Do these charts communicate to the smallholder farmer that I'm going to talk to? Because if they cannot see it, they will not appreciate it. One thing I really appreciated day 1, that was actually day 2, yesterday, was the pictorials. You see the pictures, and you're able to do a trend analysis in pictorial form with a smallholder farmer who may not really be bothered with charts, but the pictures will speak to them. These pictures will demonstrate just what their footprint has been in their journey to changing a situation from as far back as 10 years ago. And that would be a very important communication tool to get down there. Not much is reaching the smallholder farmers. When we go again with our language, and that is a barrier. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that insight. And maybe just a really quick follow-up question. You mentioned, going with visuals, going with something that demonstrates the value visually, and so it's more interpretable. Have you seen really good examples of that you could point to and say this was a great example of clear communication of geospatial or Earth observation value?
Absolutely. I think I'm not very good with names, but yesterday we had some pretty good presentations looking at how the river flow had been changing with time and with season, really showing how the cutting was happening and how the cutting was prevented by the sugarcane. I think it was a sugarcane project that demonstrated that. I think that was amazing. It's something that you can put in front of a farmer anywhere and they'll understand it. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. My next question is for Foster. So throughout the convening, I've kind of heard this repeated sentiment that we need more standards, across methodologies, across technologies, to make us more interoperable, to make sure that our studies are kind of agreeing, or we at least have some kind of support across the community in the way that we're conducting different interventions. I think, that's an obvious need, is that we need to standardize, especially when it comes to the technologies, and we want our data to be interoperable. But from the perspective of Earth observation, how do we balance that need for standards with the inherent need for flexibility to address specific use cases?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's to be nice to be flexible. Depending on the project and also on what specifically the project is for, the objectives of the project. I think that we should tailor our methodologies around the objective of the project so that we do not have like a standard methodology, which is like a one-fits-all kind of methodology for everything. So I would like to see standardization for the terminologies, for us to speak the same language, like she was saying, so I can understand her, she can understand me. So if we could standardize that, that would be fine. But for the approaches and the methodologies, that should be tailored for, I think, for each project and objectives of the project. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Any other panelists want to weigh in on that question? No, all right. And then next question for Dan. So yesterday, David mentioned the importance of trust. And I think there's a couple different elements to that. There's the interpersonal trust, that's established through transparency, that's established through accountability. But then there's also technical trust in the models, the methods, the outputs. What are some things from your perspective that we can do to help establish trust as these new technologies are emerging and are becoming a part of this ecosystem? What are some ways that we can make sure we communicate the technology clearly?
Yeah, I think when you have like a new technology, I guess what I'm specifically thinking, what my mind is driven to are some of these predictive algorithms of things that are tough, like maybe yield or maybe consumption or income. And I think people find it hard to believe that you can estimate these very complicated things using satellites. And even when you dig into the scientific papers, it's like, this is great on R squared of 0.7. And it's kind of like, well, is that good? So, I mean, I think the way you build trust is by like having lots of repeats and lots of ground truth and actually connecting these types of data to things that people really understand. So I think we saw a lot of papers that show, okay, if we can use NDVI from satellite and show that our program does whatever to NDVI, I don't think you build trust that way. I think you have to translate that into things that people care about, like yields and income, and you have to show over and over again in different types of scenarios with real data that these things are connected to build the trust for the algorithms, so that when you do what you really want to do is use them out of sample where there isn't ground truth data, that people will believe you. But I think, 1 or 2 studies is not enough. And actually what the EO people have been telling me is that it's not enough. And all these things I want to do, I shouldn't trust. So that was worrisome.
I think that's another interesting thing that I've noticed over the course of this is, that some of these studies rely on very kind of rare ground truth data sets, highlighting the importance of gathering more of that, highlighting the importance of engaging with local experts, with smallholder farmers to actually perform this ground truthing, establish these the ground truth data sets that we can use to tune models and then get that validation and start building that trust. So thank you for that, Dan. And then one last kind of planned question, then we'll switch formats a little bit. My last question is for Hamissou. So we saw earlier in the slides that there's a request from funders for better understanding of how EO can be used and its value in impact evaluations. So from your perspective, what kind of information needs to be presented to funders to actually demonstrate that value? And are there ways that you've seen the value of Earth observation be presented in the past that made you think, wow, that's valuable, we need that, we need to implement?
That's a very good and also huge question for me because I will not pretend to speak for every single donor. Even within MCC, I'm just one drop in the big ocean. Everybody knows, everybody has their own way of understanding the whatever data that you present to them. From my very personal and probably a little biased perspective, we work at MCC, we tend to be very, in terms of data availability and data accessibility, we want to be, we have been the champion for so long. So that has been part of my DNA since I joined MCC, which is to present the donor with not just the very beautifully looking reports about what has been done, what has not been done, but also give them the raw data for them to do fact-checking if necessary. So we do, at MCC, we publish every single document that our evaluator produce. We have our evidence platform where every single reports on a program, good or bad or not so beautiful, they will be published there along with the data that comes with it. So me as a part of the DACOL donor community, I have both the very polished side of evaluation, also the raw data that I can compare to see whether or not the evaluator misstated the results, understated the results, or kind of told a lie. So, but before I joined MCC, I was also part of the implementation community. I worked for a nonprofit for some time. So I know that dilemma that we usually face for the same type of program that we implement on country A and country B. Depending on who was the donor for country A, we will present a different type of reporting to that one compared to the one who funded the country B. So that put the people in the implementation field in a very difficult situation, which they have to always accommodate to whatever the donor wants. So yes, I think MCC way is a better one. It gives everything in a very raw manner. So it's up to you to make up your mind. So that's what I can say.
Thank you. So we'll switch formats real quickly. I would like to gather from our panelists just some reactions to the outputs from our convening. And we can, we'll try to keep it relatively concise. I'd love to have some time for questions as well. But let's just start with you, Petronella. We'll work our way down again. And just how do you feel about what is being represented in this in these slides as outputs from our activity? Do you think it's representative? And I kind of already asked you this question, so you know, feel free to add as much as you'd like to.
Sorry, technology. Absolutely. I think it's very representative, and it has been reiterated over and over in most of the conversations that I've had, so validated.
It seems like a lot of the you know, issues that have been raised in the last couple of days are very consistent with the, many of the points here. I think one other point that perhaps in the earlier session was raised was the question about like what types of mismatches we have, you know, within the ecosystem, and it would be helpful, you know, for you know, everybody to kind of be able to articulate. You know, there were some mentions about the internal capacity of implementing or evaluating organizations versus external, you know, EO expert capacity, but I think there's also the timing mismatch, right, in terms of the opportunities that are being identified on the ground versus funders' timeline versus experts' availability. So I think, I mean, I think some of the points are related to that, but I think that seems like a key, you know, key issue that we might want to think more about.
From the evaluator perspective, I think it mostly made sense. I wanted to maybe just draw out a couple of examples that are a little more specific of things that we find as pain points. So at IDInsight, you know, we have a bunch of researchers of different backgrounds, and we're trying to get into geospatial impact evaluations, and it's been difficult. I think there's kind of two layers to it. One is that we have a bunch of like economist dinosaurs like me who use Stone Age tools like Stata. You know, in order to get me, if somebody plopped a bunch of imagery onto my laptop, I would have no idea what to do with it, right? So to get a dinosaur like me to do GIE, I would need something that had a map and had taken all the algorithms and applied them to all the points, such that I could say, like, okay, I'm dealing with this plot. What does the algorithm say about consumption and yield? And I think the thing closest to that is like the Atlas AI product. But even, you know, there's gaps, and, you know, what we really need is like full spectrum and free and a panel data set of these kind of things. And actually what I've learned is part of this thing is from the EO people is they're like, stop dreaming. You know, it's probably not going to happen. So then the other thing is, you know, besides us dinosaurs, we have a bunch of like young Python data science programmer people. And so I tell them, I can give you guys a bunch of imagery and you guys can do this, right? And they're like, well, you know, like we can do some stuff, but actually, you know, in order to really do this properly and extract features from imagery and then train that model on some outcome, we need a month of Amazon server time, and, you know, you need some really, really hardcore geospatial. So even they need some bridges. And one of the things that's really excited them was the Mosaics tool that Sean talked about the other day that takes images and turns it into tabular features. And then if you're just like a normal data scientist, you can start doing that to create your own models. So I think what I would say is that, like, even as a team with a bunch of data scientists and economists, we have this need for public goods from the EO space that can take the edge off some of this really technical, really specific image processing and make it more accessible to maybe not economists, but at least non-super specialist data scientists.
Yes, yeah, I'm just looking at this diagram, and one of the people that, or the segments that we normally find it difficult to deal with are policymakers. And looking at this diagram, I was wondering whether policymakers were included in this study and try to find out from them how the interreactions and the relationships between EO policymakers because, I mean, you know it's difficult to communicate with policymakers, and I don't know how impact evaluators do that. So probably one of the missing, I think, segments for me is how to relate with policymakers.
Excellent. And to answer the question, we did not have policymaker representation for the exercise, but I think you're absolutely right. We need to add that as one of our other kind of responsible parties for resolving some of these issues. And I think next iteration of this exercise will certainly include that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the M&E side of me says the sample size is too small for me to draw any conclusion or to extrapolate. But from my very biased view, I agree with the results, even though I don't agree with the method. Sample.
Great. Well, thank you for all the thoughts. We'll change formats one last time. As I said, I think many of you could probably weigh in on this topic of overcoming these obstacles to collaboration within the community. So this is your opportunity to do that, whether it's a question for our panelists or whether you have an observation yourself that you'd like to share about these challenges that have already been highlighted or anything that we missed. I'm going to open the floor up and we can have a discussion. One thing that I would ask is that you be mindful of time. I know we've got a lot of thoughts, a lot of observations. We're all invested in this, and some of us are just very, maybe too interested in earth sciences. So please be concise, try to keep it short, be mindful of time so we can get as many kind of observations and questions in as possible. And I'll open up the floor.
Thank you very much. One observation is that I see a lot of from this diagram, there are arrows to funders, but I don't see any arrow going from funders to evaluators. And generally that is a lot that we face, that all the time there are questions of effectiveness and impacts, and furthermore on sustainability and value for money, mostly from funders to evaluators. So though you said that there are 50 people, of course the sample size is very, very significantly less, but still I think the relationship is not showing the true picture. Thank you.
Yeah, actually one thing that Dan said to me was pretty interesting, which is pretty rare. And that is, you know, I think with new tools and new approaches, you need new forms of communication. And as I looked at a lot of the slides this week, I have some background in remote sensing and GIS, but very few, if any, people took the time to explain the color coding on the images and what the images were actually telling us. And so it's just a sort of call out that, you know, when we combine these multidisciplines and when we combine tools and when we add new things, we need to think about the communication side of it quite closely.
Also more of a comment than a question. I just wanted to emphasize how much I appreciated Petronella's call-in to experts to be very mindful about how we go about co-creating projects and what demand-driven truly means, and that it's very easy to hide behind our jargon and a lot of math, and at the end of the day, the point of these models is to help people, and if no one can understand your expertise, then it's not going to be very impactful.
Yes, I'm glad about the discussion and also what came on the board, and I think we are making a good progress. And one of the things that I've been thinking throughout the week is, even when we are talking about demand-driven, you know, where does it end? You know, like Foster was talking about it, And first, I'm thinking about arranging a meeting between you and ISE, where the impact evaluators are. But is that where it ends? You know, is it demand-driven by the researchers? And the researchers is not the end, because the researchers research for policy and action. So how do we go beyond that level to go beyond the, you know, those who are really, really making decisions that impact life? And the whole week I've been thinking about it, that all the diagrams I've seen, and I'm thinking about parliamentary group in Lesotho or Kenya. And I'm thinking about, you know, EO experts meeting this parliamentary group, and how are you going to present it to them? That the yellow and the green and the purple shows what? So how do we communicate? So I think one of the tasks that we all have is, no matter the algorithm that you will develop, how do you break it down so that we can be able to talk in their language? And I think that is a big task that we have to do. Today at lunch, I was talking to Richard. I said, can you think about the next phase? And I think these are some of the things, and you have talked about developing a glossary, you know, the terminology. How do we bring it to their language? Because we are doing a great work, but how do we take it to the next mile? You know, that is my biggest thing that we should be thinking about in our next phase. And maybe our next convening, as you have said, we should be having some parliamentarians sitting down here. We should be having some, you know, ministers sitting down here, so that we can also listen to them. And they will love to come, you know, if we invite them. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Drew Whedon from Tetra Tech. Yeah, just immediate follow-up on that point and the communication points that were raised just prior. The way we've been trying to do it, and I'm not going to say that we've cracked the nut, but you know, it's really about sort of, because we're thinking about the ecosystem from the raw data through the derived analytics, through the application in the field. And, you know, it really comes down to kind of segmenting your users into different buckets. Are you a primary researcher? Are you an applied researcher? Are you an implementer like us at a global level? Are you a local implementer? Are you an input supplier working in the field? Are you a farmer that's working with that input supplier? You work through that entire chain, and the communication is slightly different at every single one of those steps, is sort of the short answer. And so there's really not a one-size-fits-all on this one, at least as far as we've discovered. And it's a ton of work, but it requires this kind of coordination, you know, what we're doing right now. And so I guess it's both kind of a call out that I'm happy to talk to anyone about our experience doing this so far, and also it's really about, I mean, you have to be, first and foremost, you have to be a good listener, and sort of, you know, turn off your speaking voice for a little bit and just try to understand what kind of communication your counterpart is using, and then you adjust accordingly instead of kind of pushing that message yourself. So yeah, that's all for now. Thanks.
Thanks for leading a nice and interesting panel. I was just also thinking about the same point that Drew and David, you brought up. And I was just wondering if maybe the panel could reflect on this, but when we talk about Earth observations, big data, it just seems complex, and it sort of brings that sort of knowledge inequality to some extent when you're talking to communities and local governments. And it seems like knowledge can be power sometimes. And so how can we sort of bridge that gap by also acknowledging that the local entities and communities actually reside on very granular data about their systems and their conditions, and also speak about how can we bring that data into the system, into the analytical platforms that we have or decision-making support that we have. And I wonder if that sort of is an important place to start with in terms of the communication, because otherwise it's all about, I have a whole bunch of things and I want to explain it to you, and it's all about what I have and what I'm going to give to you. So I mean, we did a scoping review for Global Center for Adaptation, and it was all focused around how do you downscale climate data for local communities, and this piece came out very strongly about the knowledge that sits there. So I was just wondering if in the conversations that maybe Tomoko and Petronella, you are working directly with the communities, if that would be an empowering way to engage more directly. Thank you.
We work with local communities a lot, and one of the things that I found fascinating was how smart these local people can be. We went out there to do some ground truthing of some land cover land use data, and we saw that a particular spot was deforested, was degraded, and apparently that was the source of a river. And these villagers use water from downstream. They go fetch water from that stream. And so we quickly showed them a classification that we had done probably 5 years ago, and something that we had just done. And then we showed them that this used to be how that spot was. And so the water had this micro ecosystem to be able to continue to provide you water. But now you guys have chopped down all the trees and look at what is there now. And immediately they were able to relate to that and said, oh yeah, we have been going there for firewood and for charcoal production, and so probably. And so the chief immediately got the community to go up there and replant, that area. So that's how powerful some of these simple products, can be. And so if we are able to understand and engage some more with the particular segment of people we are dealing with, I think they will be able to see the value in the service that we are providing.
Yeah, so I mean, I absolutely agree that farmers are very sophisticated. They collect observations. They respond to data, right? In different ways, and I do think that there are lots of ideas around crowdsourcing, citizen science, which you mentioned yesterday as well, that really think about how to present data to farmers in a way that they can use that information well. And I think there are a lot of applications where, even with the crowdsourcing, there are studies that show that when you kind of collect the data in a way that's actually usable for farmers, they actually change their behaviors. Right? So, but in order to find that right way of presenting information, right way of collecting information, I think it requires a lot of iterations between farmers and local stakeholders, again, researchers, EO experts. And I'm just thinking about how this experimental evaluation, just the whole space has evolved over the last couple of decades in the development space. And that's just a lot of the researchers spending so much time on the ground, understanding how farmers think and how they engage with the information. So I think, I think that's kind of probably the way to advance this. That's kind of how I feel. Okay.
Yeah, just to add to Tomoko's explanation, I always say that some farmers are scientists without PhDs. There's just so much knowledge that is in the communities. When we're talking about the ground truth, they're the custodians of that ground truth. They have been studying trends that we can add figures to. So this is information that is there in their minds, in their history, in their culture. But when we bring in, again, the pictures, and we can explain these pictures, we can explain our data in a way that it relates to their understanding of their own environment, their own landscapes, then it becomes a much, much more powerful way to really put the two together. And if we're able to put the two together, even when we do our forecasts and we do our future simulations, they are able to understand that their role will be to reverse changes that could happen. So I think we need to go in with communication tools that build on the knowledge that's already there, because it's there. What the planet is telling us, the farmers know, the owners of that land know.
I would just like to share our experience. I'm Alice Laborte from the International Rice Research Institute. So I would just like to share our experience in developing and operationalizing a satellite-based rice monitoring system. So we did that in 13 pilot sites in South and Southeast Asia. We did not have a good success in some of the areas, but we were successful in the Philippines. And I think that's because we were there. We have a long-standing relationship with the Philippine government. And we looked at two important stakeholders: who will generate the data after the project, and who will use the data after the project. So these two are very different, and you treat them differently. Of course, those who will generate the data after the project, they have to know how to do it and how to explain it to the stakeholders who will use the data. But at the same time, they have to be equipped to have, we help them write a sustainability plan. Because there is a cost involved to this. Even if you're using free satellite imagery, you have to have fast computers, and the ones that the project bought would have to be replaced after a few years. People, researchers who are involved in the project, they have to move on and do other projects. So they have to have people who will actually do this so that it will continue. And at the same time, with stakeholders, initially we show them maps and they said, they're pretty, but we just want tables. And so what we did was we gave them tables, but we also explained how to use the maps and what additional value they can get out of it, and tailor the products to what they need. So initially, for example, we provide mid-season area estimates and end-of-season area estimates of rice area. And they said, yeah, but we need monthly because we want to be able to forecast if we will need to import, and we need early information. And statistics, of course, they need to the end of season to interview farmers and so on. So I think these two are really critical, and also co-development. So we chose the right partner who are supposed to be producing this data and train them to be able to do it. So we transferred the technology in 2018, and until now they're still using it. So the government is still getting data from the Philippine Rice Research Institute, where we transfer the data. But as I said, we were successful in the Philippines, but not in the other countries where we also did this. And I think there's a lot to be learned about success stories and also failures. Why did we fail in the other countries, and what we could have done differently, considering that we have like a similar model that we're following across the countries.
Well, thank you. We are a bit over, so we're going to go ahead and close the session. But thank you so much for all the thoughts and insights, and thank you to our panelists for participating and preparing for this. Really appreciate it.